Good morning. My name is Lisa Ross, and I am the Supplier Diversity Manager at MAGNA. It's my privilege to be here today, even though virtually, with so many inspiring women entrepreneurs, committed supplier diversity and procurement leaders, and champions of women-owned businesses in the Great Lakes region. I really hope we can do this in person next year. I am very passionate about DEI and supplier diversity. In addition to my supplier diversity role, I am one of the leaders of our Women's Exchange employee resource community at MAGNA. Our primary focus is to hire and retain female employees. However, I also use this forum to spread awareness of supplier diversity and to encourage our internal buyers to be more intentional in their business and personal purchases. At MAGNA, we create technology that disrupts the industry and solves big problems for consumers, our customers, and the world around us. If you can imagine it, we can build it. No other company has the complete systems knowledge that MAGNA possesses. It's what has made us the industry's most trusted partner for decades. It's why our technology is in 2/3 of all vehicles produced today. As a global leader, Magna is committed to working with suppliers from diverse backgrounds, and we want to reflect the communities within which we do business. We are a proud supporter of Great Lakes Women's Business Council, the WeBank National Council, and many other supplier diversity partners, and we are thrilled to be one of the sponsors of today's We Succeed module. I'm thrilled to present or welcome our session speaker, Angelique Rewers. Angelique is the bold, always blunt, and unapologetic CEO of BoldHaus, an Inc. 5000 company that trains and advises both small enterprises and self-employed professionals on winning corporate clients. She's been called the undisputed champion at helping small businesses land big clients by Inc. magazine. Among the top 2% of women-owned businesses, BoldHaus has a global online community of over 35,000 business owners and mentored over 10,000 small businesses in 72 plus countries. BoldHaus Conferences brings entrepreneurs together with major brands like Coca-Cola, UPS, AT&T, Accenture, Intel, IBM, HP, Marriott, Chevron, Major League Baseball, and many more. Angelique also serves on the advisory board for Space for Humanity, a nonprofit expanding access to space for all humanity, as well as on the committee for the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. On the cover of Business Digest magazine, Angelique was called a fierce champion for small business owners, and her expertise has been featured by Forbes, Entrepreneur, Inc. magazine, Essence, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNBC, Business Insider, HuffPost, Lucky, Washington Post, and YFI PM. She has shared stages with superstars like Hollywood Steve Harvey, Shark Tank's Damon John, best-selling author Seth Godin, and NFL Super Bowl champion Jamal Lewis. Please welcome Angelique Rewers.
Oh my gosh, Lisa, thank you so much for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. The only thing I would wish more right now, other than spending this morning with all of you, is that I could see all of you right now in a room together. So I look forward to doing that very, very soon. A huge thank you to the Great Lakes Women's Business Council, to Michelle and her entire team, to Toyota, Eli Lilly, Kellogg's, and First Call. I'm so honored that you've invited me to be here as part of this, and could not be more honored to be a part of this discussion specifically around communications. My entire career really was in the communications field. My job in corporate was working with the C-suite on strategic communications initiatives, including everything from massive mergers and acquisitions to disinvestments, if you will, crisis communications, marketing communications, sales communications. And in that role, I had the opportunity to really see firsthand the power of communications. In fact, it's what led me to teach sales to small business owners and diverse business owners in a very different way, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to communications. And as I interviewed and met with thousands of outside vendors, suppliers, consultants, and experts, it was always the communication factor that led to whether or not someone was successful in selling to the corporation that I was working for. And I can tell you over the last 15 years that we've been doing this, it always comes down to communications. So what I want to talk with you guys about today are 3 critical communication strategies that are really designed to help you eliminate frustrations, cultivate those oh so important relationships, and at the end of the day, drive revenue in your business, allow you to be successful in not just winning a corporate customer once, but really keeping them long term, because it's really the lifetime value of each of your customers or clients that's going to make or break your success as a business owner. As Lisa shared, we've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this since about 2006 when I left my final corporate role in-house. And during the last 15 plus years, one of my most important things that I do is spend time with visionary corporate leaders who are doing big, bold things, hearing directly from them what's going on inside of their head, inside of their boardrooms, inside of their team meetings. So I want to bring some of that to you today. As Lisa shared, we've worked with over 10,000 business owners across 72 countries, who in turn have worked with corporate customers in 114 countries around the world. And as many differences as there are globally, there's actually a lot more similarities to what makes something successful for you. So we're going to get into that a little bit today. And I also just want to say, if any of you are new to working in the corporate space, I know a lot of you out there are seasoned pros, but I just want to offer a word of encouragement to those of you who are just getting started in this space, or who perhaps feel like you're restarting in many ways, given all of the changes that have happened in the last 20 plus months in the market, that there are ways to cut the learning curve. There are ways to accelerate a sales process. There are ways to really take back some control in all of this. And, the biggest thing is that there's actually more opportunity out there than there's ever been. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. These are some of the brands that our customers, our clients here at BoldHaus are working with, and brands like these. But our clients here at BoldHaus are also working with nonprofits, hospital systems, universities and colleges, government agencies. And so I mention that because really anything that we share with you today in the time that I have with you really does apply across all of these, because at the end of the day, I think it was Daniel Pink who said it first: to sell is human. Right. And so really the dynamics, while some lingo might be different, some RFP processes might have, minute differences or technical differences in qualifications. At the end of the day, when we're communicating with human beings. And, thanks to the pandemic, if you will, there has actually been a lot more similarities in the challenges that organizations are facing. I mean, when was the last time that the whole planet was in the same boat at the same time? So keep that in mind if you are working across these different sectors, and your lines of business aren't only focused in the corporate space or what traditionally is considered the corporate space. You'll be able to apply these 3 strategies I'm sharing with you today across all of these areas of business to business. So here's the journey I'd like to go on with you this morning. The first is starting by debunking the uncertainty myth. And I know, I sound like a heretic saying that. I realize that, but give me a chance to change your mind about the uncertainty myth, because if you can shift out of this mindset, it's going to do you a world of good, especially as we head into 2022. Then I want to give you a pulse on virtual work versus in-person marketing and selling, and sharing with you some interesting perspectives, both some pretty recent data as well as some anecdotal evidence that we're seeing with our clients here at BoldHaus. And then we'll move into those 3 disruptive communication strategies to help you guys get rid of some of those sales frustrations that I know drive you crazy, as well as help you build those long-term customer relationships, because that's really what it's all about. And lastly, to help you close more sales for your woman-owned business. All right. So I'm going to be brave here this morning and suggest that perhaps this idea of uncertainty is a little bit of a myth. If we were all together in person, I would ask you to raise your hand if you have heard this word at least 100 times in just 2021 alone. And no doubt we would have 100% of folks raising their hands in the room. In fact, it's very rare to read an article today, to read a webinar invitation today, to read a blog article today, to read a new research report, even from organizations like Accenture and PwC and IBM Global Consulting and all of these organizations out there that doesn't use the word uncertainty. Perhaps it's my risk management training, perhaps it's my communications training, but whenever I hear a concept being repeated over and over and over to the point that people just say the concept on autopilot, that always sends up a major red flag for me. It's very dangerous as CEOs for us to put our brains on autopilot ever, to just start repeating what everyone else is saying. In fact, one of our greatest skills as CEOs and as our ultimate rainmakers in our business is the ability to be contrarian, to be questioning, to be curious, and really to ask the questions that no one else is asking. It's one of our greatest communication tools that we have. And so when I started hearing this word uncertainty over and over and over again, really in an unrelenting way, month after month, I stopped to ask, really, how uncertain is everything that's happening? Now, don't get me wrong. When the pandemic first hit, I think the vast majority of the world was utterly gobsmacked, save for the epidemiologists and the folks who've been studying coronaviruses and the potential of a pandemic on planet Earth for a while, trying to get more government funding, and all of those folks who've been telling us for a while that it was inevitable eventually there'd be another global pandemic. But aside from those folks, I think most of us were rather gobsmacked when we woke up and realized that travel was being shut down and that we were going on lockdowns, and just how serious of a situation that it really was. But aside from that, and aside from the fact that whether we know if there's another variant coming or not, despite that, when you look at the business environment and you look at once the sort of initial shock and urgent crisis response happened, almost everything that is happening inside of organizations has been rather logical, has been predictable responses, right? So there are supply chain disruptions. So what do companies do? They shift manufacturing. We watch the automotive industry sort of move around different parts of Asia as various parts were being shut down until capacity would reach max, and then that you'd move into another market, looking for new suppliers. We're seeing it right now in the chips industry, the microchips industry, really looking at changing how those relationships and those tier structures are happening. They're saying, we thought we had two providers. Really, we had one provider. Wait a second, we need to move over here. We need to have more control of this process. We watched companies, retailers like Z Gallery and Macy's and others moved to introduce new products to fill their shelves. We saw changes in buying behaviors. So what did companies do? They shifted into new service offerings and new products to meet those demands. When we couldn't meet in person, all of a sudden IT departments and information security experts inside these companies that really did not like things like StreamYard and Zoom and Google Meets and Microsoft Teams, suddenly they all got over their objections and found a way to make that a safer environment. Employees working from home, being isolated, not having a clear division between working and going home because there's no commute. We saw initially huge enthusiasm and everybody rallied, but eventually it wore on all of us because you know what? Our brains are not actually meant for Zoom. You can read tons of articles about what happens to our brain when we're staring at camera lenses and screens all day, right? And not having a clear break between work and life. more so than we really have ever experienced, right? So employees have gotten burned out. We've seen the great resignation set in. Labor shortage is a big issue with the great resignation. So what are we seeing? Well, companies are increasing salaries, they're reorging their teams, and as was really all the talk on Squawk Box and some of the other financial channels last week, a lot of CEOs are coming out and saying, you know what? Do you know what the great resignation is doing? It's actually moving us forward faster towards the adoption of advanced automation, of AI and other technology, things we've been saying we were going to do, things we've been dabbling our toes in, sort of twinkle toeing around with. But now there's an urgency. So we're going to move forward. Each and every one of these things is cause and effect. Just like prior to the pandemic, what organizations prioritize is always driven by cause and effect, and it's always driven by urgency, even more so than importance. So, yes, we saw acceleration. Yes, the pandemic was a surprise. Yes, we have uncertainty about variants. But in terms of what's happening inside of organizations, it's no different than it ever was, in that it is always about urgency. It is always about cause and effect. And organizations are always going to do what they've always done, which is that when the market changes, about 90% of organizations will take action. About 10% of organizations will stand still. And we see the evidence of that every day in the news of brands that eventually sort of become less relevant. Some of the brands I grew up shopping at, right? This might be those retailers' last holidays with us. But nonetheless, companies take action because they're smart, they're innovative, and ultimately they're driven towards continuing the success of their brands. So as you look forward into 2022, if you haven't pulled your team together already to make a list of probably all the things that need to be added to the left-hand side of this chart, what are the things that are inevitable that are coming in 2022? And what is the logical actions and steps that organizations are going to take? If you think of it through that lens, right? If you think of it through that lens, then it won't feel so much as uncertainty, but rather inevitability. Okay. And here's the fine point I really want to drive home on this for everyone this morning. Are you and your company and your team not more certain today than ever before in the products and or services that you provide to organizations and the need for those products and or services? Because as we poll the women business owners in our community, what we are finding is that the things that they've been telling their customers, warning their customers, encouraging their customers about for the last decade have only become more critical, more urgent, more important to the success of companies today. So I would ask you, do you not have actually greater conviction today? And know this, if you continue to communicate uncertainty to the market, if you're using that word uncertainty everywhere you go, then really what you are doing is reinforcing a false belief that neither you nor your customers or clients can take action confidently. And I would propose to all of you this morning that actually what we all need to be doing to recover from the pandemic, as well as to continue to address the onslaught of technological and societal changes that are coming, is to continue to take swift, decisive action towards the future. So be mindful of that, please, in your communications. The good news is that the vast majority of senior level executives are feeling quite positive about economic growth next year. Here's some data that came from PwC's 24th annual Global CEO Survey, which I believe is a must read every year. And not just for you as the CEO of your company, but for every single person inside your organization. But more so than ever before, what CEOs told PwC is that they feel positive about the economic growth and it further improving next year. And this is this year's research. This is from this year, 2021, 76%, which they haven't seen ever. before. So that's pretty phenomenal. Of course, there's an adage in marketing and sales, and it sounds worse than it is. It's that buyers are liars. And it's not that buyers intend to be liars. It's just that how we think and what we say and what we predict doesn't always match up to what we actually do. So words don't always align with behaviors and actions, especially buying behaviors and buying actions, right? So what I like to look at and what we like to watch here at BoldHaus is actually the amount of spending that companies are doing. And what does that show? And, it was really interesting. We have lots and lots of different charts. This is one of my favorites because oftentimes employee development is an area that's considered a nice to have versus a must have. And so I predicted at the beginning of the pandemic that we would have seen a dip in spending on employee development programs that would have mirrored closer to what we saw in the Great Recession back in 2009. And you can see back in 2009, spending on employee development programs dipped pretty significantly. It was about an 18% dip down to only $244 billion worldwide. I thought we would have seen a similar percentage drop in 2020 when it came to employee training programs. In fact, there was really barely a blip with $357 billion continuing to be spent on employee training. We just had Doug Harward, who is this chairman of trainingindustry.com, speak at our BoldHaus conference that we hosted in Fort Lauderdale the first week of October. He came in and provided even more data to us. And basically what they've continued to see is spending this year. So I think that's important. Obviously, there are certain capital expenditures, particularly on in-person office buildings and facilities and things that would make sense. Obviously, manufacturing, obviously, as we see supply chains continue to move around. But again, we're really seeing pretty predictable behavior. You look at an organization like Costco, who went out and ordered their own shipping containers and their own, Freightliner, to be able to move their supplies across the ocean in order to predict better their inventory for the holidays. So I think you guys are going to continue to see that. All of that is to say that the problem really isn't that there's not enough opportunity. The problem is that there's too much opportunity. And the number one thing as you head into 2022 that I urge you to do is to focus, focus, focus. All right. So with that in mind, when Michelle and her team asked me to come and speak to all of you today, and specifically around communications, I thought to myself, well, that's perfect, because at the end of the day, everything that you need to do in order to take advantage of all the opportunity in the market comes down to communications. In fact, as a woman-owned business selling in the corporate and B2B space, there are only 3 challenges that you have to solve from a business development perspective. The first is that you need to make sure you have enough decision makers to talk to. Enough decision makers to talk to. Most folks, the number one issue that's going on inside their organization is that they're not casting a large enough net to begin with. The second challenge is that customers often don't want to talk to you. And they don't want to talk to you because they're busy, because they may not recognize that they are in a ready now place to purchase from you, or they may in fact not be in a ready now place to buy from you. And because by and large, decision makers tell researchers over and over and over again that about 70% of all of the meetings that they take with outside vendors and suppliers and salespeople, about 70% are not valuable meetings. Can you imagine that 7 out of 10 meetings that you agree to, you find at the end of that meeting, it really wasn't all that valuable use of your time? That's something that all of us who are corporate suppliers and corporate service providers need to really take to heart and look at What are we not doing in those meetings? And that's what I'm going to get into today with you guys. And lastly, oftentimes when you are having the conversations with the decision makers, you're not having the right conversations. And there are big gaps in what you need to bring to the table that would make a world of difference in how valuable of a communication meeting that really is. So we want to help you guys tackle all of those things today. Very quickly, let me just give you a quick pulse on where we are with virtual versus in-person marketing and selling, because obviously virtual is not going anywhere. And yet we're also seeing a return to in-person. So a recent study asking salespeople, what is your toughest selling challenge today? There was really no competition here. That prospecting in a virtual setting is the biggest challenge. So if your team is feeling that, you are not alone, you are not an outlier. That is by far the biggest challenge that sellers are facing today. Why? Well, you know what? It almost always comes down to communication challenges. Look what sellers don't like about virtual. Number one, it's much more difficult to connect personally. I can look into this camera lens with all the love and, encouragement in the world, but it's not going to be the same as if you and I were able to connect, shake hands, or bump elbows, or whatever we decide is going to be the case going forward. It's just not the same. People behave differently virtually as they do in person. They're not as engaged. People are chatting. People are asking questions. People are texting. They have their phone, right? They have their phones in front of them. Maybe their Skype is up, their instant message. Maybe you use Slack internally. There's all sorts of different distractions that are going on. Of course, there's technology issues. Some of you right now might be missing what I just said because there was a glitch. There was a disconnection. Your internet wasn't strong. The lighting isn't perfect, whatever it is, right? It's hard to keep control of meetings in a virtual setting. And oddly, time does feel different, does it not? It is. That is something I hope that some metaphysicist somewhere figures out for all of us, is why does time happen differently in virtual settings? And then the last thing is being uncomfortable on camera. I used to hate being on camera. I really had to get over that in the virtual world. I was like, I'll go speak anywhere as long as it's in person. But over the last 2 years, I've spoken more virtually than I think I ever spoke in person all those years combined. So these are some of the challenges that are going on. These are absolutely communication challenges, but these are the things that you want to be proactive about deciding what are we going to do? How are we going to transverse these issues going forward? Because we know that going forward, there will be a mix of virtual versus in person. If we look at it from the other side of the table, I think this is really fascinating. Only 20% of B2B buyers are saying that they are willing to spend more than $500,000 in a 100% virtual sales process. So that's sort of where we are now. This is from this year. This is McKinsey & Company asking decision makers this year in 2021 where they are on this. And what they're finding is that just 20% are spending over $500,000 in a fully virtual sales process. And only 11% of B2B buyers are spending more than $1 million in a fully virtual sales process. So I think that's something to be aware of. If you are outperforming this in a virtual sales process, I think that's a great benchmark and something for you and your team to be really proud of, that you've been able to outperform those numbers. If you're actually seeing more than 20% of your over $500,000 sales, or more than 11% of your over 7-figure sales coming from a fully virtual sales environment, good for you. And that really, I think, is something to celebrate with your sales team. You have to go back a little further to find some really great data on what senior executives and decision makers don't like about a virtual selling environment. But 91% of executives believe that face-to-face meetings actually allow for more effective persuasion. And 82% say that face-to-face leads to better decision making. Meanwhile, executives and decision makers really prefer the relationship building that happens in face-to-face, the ability to read body language, that the environment is better for complex thinking, timely decision making, and a less distracting environment. And it's really interesting because we saw this. I just saw this. I was just on a flight out to Denver, meeting with the advisory board of Space for Humanity. And the woman sitting next to me on the flight was actually a decision maker from a corporation. She was heading to Denver along with 10 of her team members from all over the country who were all flying into Denver to meet with the corporate vendor. It was easier for all of them to travel to the vendor than to have the vendor travel and then have, 9 decision makers from other parts of the country. So since the corporate customer was so geographically dispersed, they decided to fly to the vendor. And so I used the opportunity to ask her why not just do it over Zoom? And she said, you know what? Zoom has replaced conference calls for us. So instead of doing conference calls, we tend to end up on Zoom. But you know what? We took it as far as we could on Zoom. We felt like we just needed to get in the room because it's complicated what we're discussing. We all need to be focused. We need to roll up our sleeves. We need to have a whiteboard and we need to all be present to do it. So it's going to be a mix of both going forward, but here is some data out of McKinsey. Again, this is just from a couple of months ago, looking at the pace at which we're returning to in-person sales meetings and customer events. And obviously, there's always going to be the question of variance, but there's serious momentum moving in this. So if that's the case and you guys are going to have a mix, we want to make sure that you, in fact, have the best communication strategies possible to succeed in either environment. So let's get into some disruptive communication strategies to help you guys do that. Okay. The first thing I want to share with you, the first disruptive communication strategy I want to share with you is that you have a mushy middle that needs to be fixed. Your mushy middle. So if you want to kind of think about the Pillsbury Doughboy and his cute commercials back in the day when they sort of give him a little push in the middle and he'd giggle. Well, it's not so funny when we are trying to sell and we have a mushy middle. But don't worry, this strategy does not involve sit-ups or crunches or any core exercises, I promise. Here's the thing about business development in the B2B and corporate space. You already know it's important to get high proximity visibility in front of real decision makers. But you know what? That's actually pretty easy to do because you're either going to put time or you're going to put money at it to make that happen. You're going to buy sponsorships with speaking opportunities. You're going to do email prospecting. You're going to host executive roundtables or power lunches or executive forums. All these things that we tell our clients to do, we call them the anchors. Those, what are you doing every single month in order to get that high proximity visibility in front of real decision makers? But at the end of the day, while it takes some elbow grease, it might take a little bit of budget and consistency and discipline to do it. It's not that hard. It just takes commitment and consistency. The issue is that you have to get to conversations that create cash flow in your business. You have to get to the decision maker table. But most folks and most companies, and this is about 90% plus out there, and again, we've been doing this a long time. We've looked at over 10,000 businesses. Most companies, they look at the business development problem as saying, you know what, we just need to go out there. We just need to be visible. And then we might ask for a meeting or we'll wait for the corporate decision maker to ask for a meeting. And that leaves a tremendous amount of money and opportunity and impact on the table because it's missing this right here. It's missing the bridge strategy. The middle, the mushy middle has to get tightened up. You need a strategic way to go from having that high proximity visibility to being in a conversation that creates cash flow in your business. And this is especially important because you need to recognize that at any given time, only about 1 to 3% of your corporate customers are even in a ready now process to buy from you. And no amount of just keep following up is going to move people, decisions, and companies who are ready soon, ready later, ready when, or ready never. Just keep pestering corporate decision makers. And that terrible advice of just keep following up doesn't actually earn you. It doesn't earn you the conversation with the decision maker, because there's no value in it if they're not ready now. If they're ready now, of course they want to talk to you. They're excited to talk to you because they're in a buying decision. They're starting their sales cycle. They're aware and recognize it, so they want to talk to you. Everyone else, they don't see it as a priority. Yes, there are folks in supplier diversity that will take the time to get to know outside suppliers, and God bless them for doing that work. But the ultimate internal decision makers, those folks don't meet with suppliers just to meet with suppliers, right? So what are you going to do? You need to have effective bridge strategies in your company that give you time and opportunity to build credibility and rapport, provide immediately relevant value to the customer, illuminate the biggest priority based on your customer's to-do list, their calendar, their inbox, their key initiatives, their key drivers, and thus the most logical starting point for you to work with them. And most importantly, effective bridge strategies build internal consensus, or at least help to build internal consensus inside of corporations. So what are some effective bridge strategies that give you that time to communicate, to create a two-way communication and bring value to the decision makers? Well, there are things like participating in internal roundtable discussions inside of organizations, bringing encore presentations to small groups with really high-level content, executive briefings, proprietary assessments, competitive analyses, market analysis, in-depth case studies that really are teaching, not selling, but teaching opportunities, business cases, better mousetraps, gap assessments, savings and cost analyses, ROI analyses, after action reviews, and research, proprietary research and studying findings that your company invests in and brings it to your customers on their behalf. I think one of the best bridge strategies I ever saw a company do was in the telecommunications space. And this is, telecommunications technology has changed a lot over the last decade. So this was about a decade ago. But essentially what this company did is they would go into companies and they would do a complementary analysis of all of their switching devices, which are very expensive to maintain, service, and replace. And they would show them all the redundancy that they had, absolutely no cost to them. It was absolutely a lead loss strategy. The idea of bringing them the value to say, listen, whether you work with us or you don't work with us, here's where you have redundancy that you don't need. That's an example of a bridge strategy. At the end of the day, a bridge strategy is insight so valuable that decision makers would actually be willing to pay for it. Or maybe in the past, you've had a random customer that actually did hire you to bring a certain degree of insight, but really that insight is just sitting there. And what it could really be is your key to unlocking conversations, to create a reason for decision makers, extremely busy, distracted, decision makers, to really sit down and glean something of value, to start that relationship building process, and to start a two-way dialogue between your brand and those decision makers, which is a pretty important thing to do right now. One of the biggest challenges that corporations have today, is an open-ended learning and decision loop when it comes to making critical buying decisions for their organizations. There's more decision makers than ever involved. There's an expectation of having more data and information than ever because the internet exists, because information is right at our fingertips. But now buyers, procurement, supply chain, and the ultimate end use decision maker is expected to know all of this information and vet all of their options. There are more interdependencies and complexities. There's more risk avoidance, and there's more cost accountability. So it's your job as the seller to make it easier for your customers to navigate this process and to be able to make a buying decision so that they don't get stuck in a paralyzed buying process. So disruptive communication strategy number 2 is to arm your internal champions with a vendor agnostic business case. And when I say vendor agnostic business case, I mean, it's not about you. It's not about your brand specifically. It's not about your technology or your product specifically, but rather it's very agnostic communication in to help them navigate this mess over here. So a vendor agnostic business case means that you would be bringing to the conversation the pros and cons and the costs versus benefits of different feasible solutions that your customer might be considering as they go through their buying cycle. The pros versus cons and cost versus benefits of them doing it internally versus externally. So this is being very objective, transparent, and honest with them, contributing to that conversation. The pros versus cons of feature options versus add-on solutions. Well, should we do this? Do we need all these extra pieces, all these fancy bells and whistles, or do we just need this? What are the pros and cons? What is the third-party data on the expected return on investment shown over time? How long does it objectively take for a company investing in your type of product, technology, or service to see that return on investment? What's an objective list of all the ancillary expected benefits, the positive side effects that they might experience? And what are the potential downsides or ripple effects that no one else has the courage to tell them that they need to consider and know in the buying process? What's an analysis of the adoption rates across the industry or the marketplace overall? In other words, if a brand is worried about keeping up with the Joneses, what are the Joneses up to? What are they doing? What's the overview of the competitive landscape? Again, a vendor agnostic business case is not about you. It's not about selling your brand or your solution specifically. It's about helping the customer to understand why they should invest at all in improving, increasing, adopting, moving to, replacing a product, service, or technology that they have. What is the ultimate business case behind doing it, whether or not they work with you? This is the type of communication that builds greater trust, transparency, rapport, credibility, and frankly, confidence. And it's the kind of conversations as we head into 2022 that you must be having. And then lastly, the third communication strategy that I really want you to embrace in 2022 is putting risk management on the discussion table before your customer does. About 80 to 85% of the businesses we work with, as we're going through an analysis with them, they essentially have a fingers crossed, don't ask, don't tell, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil when it comes to the risk proposition of the solution that they're bringing to the table. Please, 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 I hope they don't ask about that. Or they try to shove it under the table or appease, or sort of assuage those concerns without really addressing them. That is the worst possible communication strategy you could bring in today's market climate. On the other hand, what you can do is have a proprietary method for helping your customers avoid their biggest complaints, their biggest ROI, return on investment saboteurs, right? Things like choosing the wrong solution, choosing the wrong vendor, failure to get the expected results, schedule overruns, cost overruns, supply chain disruptions, employee resource shortages. You as a vendor being difficult to work with, because I promise you, and Bain did an interesting study on this about 10 years ago. Bain went to corporate customers and they said, what is the percent value that you feel you're getting from your external vendors? And then they asked the vendors, what percent value do you think you're bringing to the table? Well, the vendors said about 80%. The corporate customers felt that number was at 8%, right? So vendors are known sometimes to not live up to expectations or to be high maintenance. Failure to measure success, to get benchmarks and to accurately measure, lack of scalability, lack of on-time, accurate, thorough communication, lack of domain expertise, or didn't fix on focusing the right problem. These are some of the biggest risks that we hear from corporate customers over and over again. So the question for you is, do you know the top 3 most costly and/or consequential risks related to products and/or services that you sell, specifically in your space, whether it's a technology, a software, an actual product, or a service offering that you're bringing, or an outsourced solution? Do you know with certainty, when was the last time you asked the marketplace? When was the last time you looked at third-party data conducted your own insights interviews with customers, both who bought from you and didn't buy from you, conducted pulse surveys, and even have done an audit of the last 5 years of your customer engagements to look at what are the three biggest risks to that return on investment saboteur. Do you know that? Have you done your homework? And can you say it because you have the data? You have the proof. You've done the interviews. You've looked at the third-party data. You've done your own strategic audit of your own data to know what those three things are. Then design a proactive risk mitigation strategy for each of your clients' three biggest risks. Not just, oh, we've got that covered, but what is your 5-step plan or your 6-point plan or your 3-step guarantee? What is it? And then give each one of those risk mitigation strategies a branded proprietary name to really drive home that this is a methodology that we have documented, we've trained our team on, we've branded it, and it is unique to our company. And then, most importantly, track the results of when your customers apply those risk mitigation strategies methodically, rigorously, predictably. How does that drive success for your customer? Because when you can communicate that at the decision maker table, it's a very different conversation. So I would love, let me tell you guys, I wish that we had a half a day to talk about these communication strategies. I hope that there will be an opportunity perhaps for us in 2021 in order for us to continue this conversation, because there's obviously more to it. But what I hope I've done today is really at least spark some ideas about where you can take your communication with decision makers up a notch in what you're doing to disrupt, to build that bridge, to bring that agnostic business case, that brand agnostic business case to the table, and to bring a risk discussion to the table like no one else is doing. Because if you do those three things in your communication, start the conversation with you going first, delivering value with that bridge strategy, then bringing value to help them agnostically with their decision-making process in order to make a change. And lastly, being willing to put that risk on the table first and then confidently explain how you're going to mitigate that risk. It's going to utterly transform your conversations with corporate decision makers, with procurement, supply chain, supplier diversity, and those end user decision makers inside the organization. So if you're looking for more resources, you can find them on our website at BoldHaus.com. And also, I'll just say to Shelly or to Michelle, if you guys want me to take any questions, I know you have a very full schedule today. I'm happy to do that. But I also want to make sure that we stay on time today, because you all have a phenomenal half-day experience planned for all of you. Oh, I love that. How do we get help with the research? Sarah's asking, how can we get help with the research to do the case study? Oh, I absolutely love that. There actually is someone that we personally can recommend. Her name is Lisa Ann Edwards, and her specialization is actually helping companies to measure the ROI that they are having on their corporate clients and corporate customers. If you want to email my team at concierge@boldhaus.com, or Mary, another email address would be mary@boldhaus.com. I would be delighted. She is a separate business, but she is phenomenal at helping to get that. Separately, there are a ton of incredible case study writers that are online. That's really a specialty of writing effective case studies. But first, you want to get the data of the ROI impact that you're having on your customers. And Lisa Ann Edwards' company is, I think, the best in the world at helping people do that in a really sophisticated way that actually your customers, your buyers are so happy to have that data to then go back and show the ROI internally, because remember, the people that you guys are talking to are committed to making positive transformations inside their organizations. They absolutely love when they can prove the value of the investments that they're making in an objective way. So I am happy to do that. Let me see if I have another one. And let's see. If there's any other questions. Oh, I love this. Nancy was so kind. She said, "This is speaking directly to me and where I am with my business." I'm so glad to hear that. And I think, Nancy, and for everyone, let me just say, as we wrap up here, and I'll happily hand this back to Shelley here in just a minute. Oh, thank you so much. Sydney just said, such a great presentation, Angelique, great recommendations. We take time multiple times throughout the year to ask corporate decision makers in various parts of the organization, ranging from supply chain and procurement over to IT, over to the executives that are heading up lines of business, facilities management, CISOs, CIOs, heads of corporate communications, heads of human resources. And we ask them, what can outside small business owners do a better job of when women business owners, diverse business owners, small businesses come in and they have that opportunity to get that meeting with you. And time again, they tell us that they often don't know what to ask, but they really wish that outside vendors and suppliers and service providers would come in bringing valuable information to help them get clear on the actions they need to be taking, the value of different solutions, help them sort through the complexities that they're dealing with. If that is the lens that you communicate to your decision makers, as opposed to coming to the table with I'm just going to keep following up, waiting for you to buy from me lens, it will radically transform your business next year. And again, I'm happy to continue this conversation offline with any of you. Sydney just said, for the bridge strategies, does that normally happen after initial conversation with corporate clients? Sydney, it depends. There are two ways to use a bridge strategy. If you have an opportunity to host an executive roundtable, which I sure hope you guys are hosting your own executive roundtables and your power breakfasts and your power lunches and your executive forums every quarter, or you speak at a third-party conference or you give a webinar, you can use a bridge strategy as an invitation to go from speaking from one to many brands, from one to many decision makers, to creating a real reason to have a follow-on conversation. One of my favorite bridge strategies, if I'm in a room of corporate decision makers, is to say something to the effect of, look, if you're the only person from your entire corporation that's here at this conference or in this session right now, raise your hand. Okay, great. So here's the thing. You're probably going to be really excited about what you just heard here today. But if there are 8, 9, 10 other people or more inside your company that really needs to hear this information, or maybe a specialized version of this information that's customized to your industry or your company, I would be happy to do a virtual encore of this presentation. And I can customize it to make it really valuable for your team of 8, 9, 10, 12, or whatever the case may be. I'll wait at the back of the room if you'd like to have that conversation with me. In that case, Sydney, I'm really using the bridge strategy to give more value. Give. That is really when it comes to insights and industry knowledge, because it's not what you're selling, but that's how you build the relationship, is you go first in investing in that relationship. So in that case, we're actually using it to move from a marketing environment in order to move to a relationship building with that particular group of decision makers or executives. Another time you can use a bridge strategy is as a cold outreach. So if there are brands that are on your named account list for 2022 and you have proprietary research that you've conducted, that's a great reason to reach out. A lot of sales prospecting emails are basically, hey, we have this solution and you should buy it from us. I mean, it might be a little bit more nuanced than that, but that's essentially what it sounds like. It's a very different conversation when you reach out to a brand and say, I wanted to reach out and introduce myself. We work with brands like KPMG, Facebook, Mercedes. And recently we've been briefing our customers on brand new proprietary data that we have that shows X, Y, and Z. And we're reaching out to 20 specific brands that we think would benefit from this research. And we would be happy to brief you in person or over Zoom on this proprietary data that's not available anywhere else. That's a way to use a bridge strategy to as a cold door opening, instead of leading with a buy from me, let me pitch to you, let me tell you what we're all about. It's about opening the door with value. And that's really the environment that we're in today. People want the relationship. They only have time to meet with people when there's value on the table. Let's see. Okay, great. So I think that's probably all the questions, Shelly. But again, if anybody wants to connect with me, LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. You can also find us on boldhaus.com. And hopefully I'll have an opportunity to see all of you in person next year, perhaps, fingers crossed, which would be absolutely wonderful. Yes, I can absolutely, I think I probably have to pop over to the other room and I can put my LinkedIn. I'm also, you guys, the only, I think, Angelique Rewers on all of LinkedIn. I think there's only 2 of us on the planet. I'm not kidding. So hopefully we'll see you there. But Shelly and to the entire team, as well as to Toyota and Eli Lilly and First Call and Kellogg's, thank you guys so much for having me. My only regret is that I can't see all of your faces and interact with you more and network with you more over lunch, but I'm really honored to be here. And I hope that you each took away something of value that you can put into action before the year is out.